Hello, my name is Bob Brown, and it's my privilege to host this show, which is based on the reality that Westboro is a great town filled with interesting people. Many of them are long-term residents who have so many memories and stories about life in Westboro in days gone past. And so your local cable station, Westboro TV, has initiated this series of programs which are designed to reflect upon life in earlier days and to possibly make suggestions about how we can improve life in this fine town for the future. Well, it's my privilege this afternoon to introduce to the town a person that many people know, Joe Harrington, who is our town moderator. And we're going to spend a little time today getting to know Joe and how he came into Westboro and what he's done for work, but we're also going to key in on town meeting. We're getting into that season, and I'd like to talk to Joe a little bit about why we have this form of government. So that'll be what we'll conclude with.
Thanks
so welcome, Joe.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
Why don't you give us a little talk about how you came to end up in Westboro?
How I came to end up in Westboro? Well, born and brought up in Massachusetts, but over on the North Shore in a town called Wenham, midway between Beverly and Ipswich, one town back from the coast. So certainly am a product of Massachusetts and New England. We always swam in the ocean at Cranes Beach, and I was 16 before I found out you could swim and not be cold at the same time. But moved around quite a bit, actually. Went to MIT and met the girl of my life, who turned out to be an Austrian, whom I met over there. And she had come to this country on an exchange visa, a Fulbright travel grant. So that required us to return to Austria, or at least leave the country for a couple of years. They told me once at one point, "You don't have to leave the country, Mr. Harrington. Only your wife has to leave the country." I said, well, I thought I would tag along. So we lived in Austria for 2.5 years on my first job, and then came back, tried to locate in New England. The fit wasn't quite right, and I wound up in Chicago. So a lot of people, knowing that I came to Westboro from Chicago, think of me as a product of the Midwest. I'm not really, but in any event, after 4 or 5 years in the Chicago area and still thinking of ourselves as visitors after 4 or 5 years, we just decided we really need to work where we want to live instead of the other way around. So after some shopping and looking, I landed a job with New England Electric. Some know it as Mass Electric, some know it as New England Power. There were many companies out there on Turnpike Road at the New England Electric building, but that's what brought me back to Massachusetts and to this part of Massachusetts. And we took a look at Westboro and said, well, we could live in a town or two away, but why would we want to do that? And so we actually found a place that I fulfilled a dream I'd held in, when I was on the job in the Midwest. I actually could walk to work. And I did on good days. There was no access road at that point, the access road that connects Route 9 and Flanders. Although a look at the town report for 1972 shows it was already on the drawing boards, but you could actually walk over there, and I did a number of times. So that's really what drew us to Westboro and as my work location. And then just you look at the community and you say, why would we want to move farther away? Let's see if we can stay right here. I'd been in town about I don't know, a couple of weeks or so, and my dad called up. He said, "Where did you say you moved to?" And I said, "Westboro." And he said, "Get your hat and coat and head for the cemetery. We've been there before." And well, I did look without any success in the cemetery because I knew that we'd had actually pre-revolutionary ancestors here. But people said, "Oh, you need to talk to a person named Rachel Deering, who was officially or unofficially the town historian."
Yeah, she was great.
And a marvelous person. And her father had been a genealogist, and she had adopted that interest, and also all the little cards and the resources that he had left to her. And she was good enough. We were bowled over. She actually gave us the little cards that relate to our family.
Wow, great.
So I still have those, of course. It turns out that, well, when the family came over in the 1630s, it's a story in itself, and landed in Watertown. But a couple generations later, a person named Samuel Harrington came to Westboro as an adult. And there's a street over in the Ullman Farms development that bears his name.
Right.
Lieutenant Samuel Harrington. The lieutenancy does not stem from the Revolution, it stems from the French and Indian War.
Wow.
His years were 1704 to 1784. So he lived to be 80, which was a ripe old age in those days. Coincidentally, the same years, birth and death of Parkman.
Ebenezer,
Yeah. So he was a person of some repute in the community, I guess, and but way old for the Revolution. But his son Joseph was not at all, and Joseph was a troublemaker. I mean, Joseph was on the Committee of Correspondence. He was one of those people that the British really, I'm sure, didn't like at all. But so he was of just the age to be very active in the pre-revolutionary and revolutionary activities. He is buried over on South Street. Lieutenant Sam is out behind the bank. He's across from Town Hall.
Okay. Same as Parkman then?
Yes, yeah, and no more than 50 feet from Parkman's grave. And the veterans are good enough to decorate every year, and you can find it because there's a little flag on it in May.
Great.
But it's, the stone still stands. Over on South Street, where his son is buried, there's a row which he bought. Must have bought it when that cemetery was new, because he died in, I think, 1815, something of that nature. And his headstone's gone. It's been either vandalized or removed or something, but the row is still there. And then family did not heed Horace Greeley. We went east. And Joseph's son went back to Boston, and it would be quite a few generations before we came back. So, but we've been here before, as my dad said.
Good ties.
Yeah,
Good
yeah,
ties to
it
the community.
makes you feel that, indeed, as Dad said, you've been here before.
That's
We've
right.
been here before.
Great. Let's turn now to the role that you have as the moderator. And now, as a moderator, we all know that you chair a town meeting, but there must be other duties of a moderator.
There are, and it's mostly appointments.
Okay.
And when I went to talk to my predecessor, Jim Nye, he said, running the meetings, not that much of a problem. He said, the committee appointments, that's a tougher one. And Bob, I am finding that to be true, and truer with each passing year. I appoint the Finance Committee, the Personnel Board, and I have some other appointments to Capital Expenditures Planning, and there are one or two others. It's a total of, I want to say, I think 18, 9 and 6 is 15, yes, 17 or 18 appointments. And I am finding, particularly this past year, it took me most of the summer to network and get to some people who not only were qualified and wanted to do it, but had the time and were able. I don't know if that's part of a trend or it's just a singularity for this particular year.
Is it something that you go out and recruit, or would you like people, when they see there's an opening, to be in touch with you to say, I'd be interested?
I love to have people volunteer for it. There used to be, it probably used to be true too, that if you put yourself forward for Finance Committee, that was an automatic no. I mean, that's what I was told. That if that ever was true, it no longer is. I welcome nominations, self-nominations, absolutely. I particularly welcome them at times when there isn't an opening, because it makes it much easier for the interviewee and for me if we're talking about a potential future thing.
Right, yeah.
That's really what works best, and I'm bound and determined that over the course of the next few months I will hold enough of those sorts of interviews. No implication that anyone in particular on either of those committees is going off. I have not heard from any of my appointees. Haven't even looked to see who's coming up this year. But what I think would be ideal would be is if I always had a list of 2 or 3 or 4 people who were ready to at least consider it when an opening comes up. So that's
Now,
the
what's
way
the
I prefer to
process you
operate.
use? You get a name, you go and interview them? Is that what you do?
Absolutely. For a first appointment, I would never do it without an interview. For a reappointment, when I know the person well, we often just do it on the telephone. But if there are issues, then we sit down and talk. Awful lot of cups of coffee at Friendly's have been consumed over this sort of thing. Sometimes I'll go to a person's house, and once in a while they'll come to mine. I have put on the town website, I don't know who looks at it, but if you go to what I will call the town meeting corner of the website, which you get to from the home page by clicking on town meeting, you find my welcome letter and then some tabs that you can click on, and one of them relates to appointments. And I say there all the things that I've just said to you, and encourage people to do that.
Having lived through several town moderators, eras, I really appreciate the work that you do in helping people understand how the town works and how the town meeting works, and doing a little coaching on that.
I think that it works best when there are simple, clearly defined rules. We don't get too hung up in process. Spend most of our time talking about substance. That's what in my view, substance beats process every single time. So I've tried to make it simple and also make the rules available. There are towns where it's kind of an insider's game to know what I moved the previous question, or some of this code that gets used. Over the years, I've tried to simplify that. We've managed to get rid of the motion to pass over, which is a means of voting twice on one issue. Let's see, I'll think of some other things. Reconsideration is no longer the game that it used to be. So
that was a real art back a few years ago.
Oh, you had to be an insider. You had to know.
That's right.
We probably shouldn't talk about it because someone will take it as how it works now. But it was, as you say, it was a game, and your people had to know that if you voted yes on the main motion and then its proponent got up and moved reconsideration, you're supposed to vote no, and take away the bad guy's possibility to reconsider you later when you'd left.
Yeah, right.
So we've tried to simplify it, and I try to keep the rules, which are spread all through the general laws, the charter, the bylaws, some reference books. I've tried to pull the main ones together and make that available at the meeting itself and also on the website.
Yeah.
So.
Before we go into town meeting a little bit further, just going back to the appointments again, how do you feel about term limits?
I know some towns do it. I think that basically the town will limit terms when it sees it fit, when it's ready to. As far as my committees go, my standard, my watchword is no term limits, no entitlements, no tenure. Okay, the fact that you've been here forever does not mean that it's going to continue, if there's reasons which we'd talk about. But the fact that you've been here forever does not mean that you should go away with your experience and not be there. So I'm very comfortable with no term limits, as long as it's coupled with a no tenure, no I'm here because I want to be here and I'll be here as long as I want to. Yeah. That I don't like that at all. Yeah. So that's my thought on that.
That's good.
One other thing on appointments that I failed to mention before, I talked about standing committees. One of the bigger challenges has been appointment of school building committees, which you know from the inside because you were on the last the last one. And there the challenge is the flip of this problem I mentioned before with the standing committees. There, how many did you have in the committee? 7, was it?
7, yeah.
7, okay. Well, I think I got for that last one 21 or 25 applications of people who really wanted to be in that room. And that's the other thing. How do you tell a person who is qualified and is interested and wants it in the worst way, I'm sorry, we don't have room for you. But I did interviews with everyone, but that's a key one. That's in its day, a school building committee is as important as some of these others.
Yeah, I think we had over 100 meetings.
Wow. And you took on 2 schools.
2 schools, right?
I tried to dissuade you and your chair from.
You don't dissuade Steve.
No, I said no. You just do the high school. We'll have a different committee. No, you won't. And actually, I was presiding, so I couldn't really get into the debate, and he just made the motion to keep the existing school, the high school building committee, and expand its purview to the other. Yeah. And the proof of the pudding's in the eating, and it certainly worked out well.
The shame of that was that we learned so much kind of on the job about what it's all about. And you can see the flaws in this whole system as it applies to the state funding and all that sort of thing, and how you hire contractors and that whole ball of wax. It just desperately needs to be revised, and the state just doesn't seem to have any interest in doing it. Yeah. We've made contacts with them, and they kind of laugh you off and say, well, this is the way it's done, and it's a shame, because it's a wasteful system at this particular point.
Yeah. And not at a time when we can't afford to waste.
That's right.
These resources.
Right. That's right. But I think if I could add just an addendum to what you're talking about, it seems to me as citizens, we have to have a maturity that says sometimes we're going to be told, not now. You apply for something and you think you should have it, but let's get over this feeling that I've been done in because I didn't get the job. Let's accept the fact that somebody else can do it well. So. Yeah.
Well, that's another thing that goes with a job. It just does go with it, and I see it on a smaller scale after, not every town meeting, but it's not unusual after a town meeting that someone will come up to me and say, I had my hand up and you didn't call on me. That's right. And that's why we put in the standing microphone, so I'd have some sort of an answer to why didn't you call on me, and that's the reason I have the standing mics. They're not very popular, but they're there if someone feels they really have to be heard.
While we're on that subject now, we have town meeting now televised.
Yes.
Do you think that's advantageous or a distraction? I mean, does it draw away from attendance, or?
I wasn't sure how it was going to work out when it first came along, and I was basically in favor of it. But I am having second thoughts, I must say. I can't tell you how many people come up to me in Stop and Shop and say, saw you on TV the other night.
Yeah, right.
I said, oh, really? And they said, yeah, I keep an eye on the town meeting. I watch. And I said, it's great. How about coming down? Oh, well, we had something else to do that day, or something else of that nature. Yeah. I do feel that it's, well, I know this, that attendance is not growing with the speed that the town is growing. Right. And I can give you some history too on that, because it's not just a recent trend. When we came to town, the population was about 14,000. Right. And I'm going to guess, I couldn't quickly find in the reports, but I'm going to guess the voters list was 7,000, 8,000, something of that nature. The quorum was, I believe, 3% of the voters list. So this is the 1972 report. The quorum was 210. By the middle of the 70s, it had crept up to 260, 270, and then we were having trouble. Yeah. And I don't recall exactly which meeting it was, but I can recall Jim Tashin presiding, so it would have been 72 to 84. Somewhere in there, we cut it down to, I believe, 200. Right. And then in the 90s, I actually urged a 0 or a 25-person quorum at I was plugging this idea, and the Finance Committee threw up his hands in horror and said not less than 100. And I did not relish a floor fight with my own Finance Committee, so I settled for 100, and that's what it remains to this day. Yeah. But as you look at the population growing and the voters list growing, and the number of people attending is if anything, there's shrinkage. Yeah. Unless you get a big exciting issue.
Yeah, right.
But fundamentally, I think it's a sign of our times.
But I wondered if it wouldn't make sense to consider taping the show and then playing it later, so that people can't just sit back and.
I think there's much to be said for that. I really do. I think having it available for people who are shut-ins, or maybe there are people who are on business travel and they're away
Right.
from town and they want to catch it when they come back, that's all good. But I think running it simultaneously with the actual fact has this downside.
I think so.
Now, there is, of course, you say, oh, with cell phones, you can get a network, and although my cell phone at least doesn't work in the auditorium, but you can step outside. It doesn't take long, and a few people can alert others and get them down here. But that's a little more cumbersome than just watching
right.
the TV and
That's
coming
right.
down.
You can't take the whole scheme away, but it seems to me that that's a distraction now, the television live.
Well, it isn't the distraction during the meeting that we
No,
thought
but I
it
mean
would
a
be.
distraction in the sense of attendance.
Yes, yes. No, I think it is, and we should give thought to discussing that with the TV folks and making even if it was an hour or two later, just
Yeah.
enough so that you're not
just off center.
not watching it live.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
there's much to be said for that, Bob.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about why we have it. I mean, there's been some controversy. You've been involved in it about whether we should have town meeting and the format it takes.
At all, yeah.
Yeah. And what other forms of government might we have? You've studied this a good deal.
Yeah.
Defend it a little bit.
Okay. Where did it come from? It came from the fact that when the English settled in this area in the 17th and 18th centuries, they brought with them some very firmly fixed ideas about how to handle local problems. And you had these local forums that debated and discussed and voted, and then when they had voted, then all were bound by the will of the majority. That's sort of where it came from. They didn't get off the Mayflower without holding a meeting on the boat before they got off. Although that isn't 100% parallel, but be that as it may. That has evolved into the legislative branch of town government. Now, you need a legislative branch. In a city, it's the city council. In a representative town meeting town, it's the representative town meeting. In a town like Westboro, with open town meeting, it's the town meeting. You say, legislature? Doesn't look like a legislature to me. Well, it is.
Sure it is.
We appropriate money, classical function of a legislature. We make, amend, and repeal bylaws. And we act as a check on the executive branch. A lot of the stuff we do in town meeting is permissive in nature. It's the selectmen that actually buy a piece of land, authorize with the treasurer a borrowing, and do various things. But for the key things like a borrowing, which obligates future generations or future years, they do need the permission of the town meeting. Now, sometimes town meetings fall into the error of thinking that we bought land or we did a borrowing. You didn't do a borrowing. You didn't buy any land, but you were part of the process. And in that way, we act as a check and a balance on the executive branch. So it is a legislature. You need someone to do that. And I've already mentioned the three options available under state law: open town meeting, representative town meeting, and city government.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And that's all legislative? That's all there are, three
That's
forms?
That's it.
Okay.
You have to have more than 6,000 population before you can get away from open town meeting. We obviously passed that test. When you go to representative town meeting with town growth, when you go to city government, there is a matter for local preference. There are towns like Irving, I believe, went to representative town meeting as soon as it could, and has come back, if I'm not mistaken. If it's not Irving, it's another one of the towns out in the valley. But those are the options, and if you just look at towns on a scale of population, we're in the 15 to 20,000 bracket, and the overwhelming majority are open town meeting. If you look in the 20 to 25,000, which is where maximum build-out would take us at some point, the planners have figured out that, was it 23 or 4,000, somewhere out in there. that population category, it's just about 50-50. So we are pushing up toward the point where it's a 50-50 proposition, just going on what other people have done, which needn't be our guide. Andover is open town meeting, and they have 32,000 people or something like that.
Yeah.
So you don't have
How
to.
does the town manager interface with this? Now, we're changing the title from coordinator to manager. You see any change coming with that distinction?
Well, I wrote the selectmen a letter when it became clear that Henry Danis was going to move on and they would be looking. I've had a marvelous relationship. It's worked extremely well. As you go toward a town meeting, all the cards are in the hands of the selectmen. They pick the time, they pick the place, they pick the date, they issue the warrant.
They prioritize the warrant.
They prioritize the warrant, put the things in order. Technically, the moderator doesn't have a word in that. When, however, you get to a town meeting, the moderator has a strong hand in procedure, not outcomes. It's the townsfolk that determine the outcome.
Good point.
But the moderator has a lot to say about procedure. And technically, the selectmen don't have to be there. Of course, they are, and we need them, and they have to be, and all the rest. But it's an interesting illustration of the checks and balances that before the meeting, all the cards are in the selectmen's hand. During the meeting, I would say the moderator has the controlling hand, at least in process and procedure. And interestingly, just to finish the story, after the meeting, the clerk writes the record, and only the clerk, and no one has anything else to say other than the clerk. You can come with tapes, you can come with pictures, you can come with witnesses and affidavits. It's the clerk's word that does it. There's an amusing lawsuit back in the 1800s somewhere when the moderator differed with the clerk as to what had happened. And the justices said, and the attorney said, shouldn't you give moderators feeling some consideration too? And the justices wrote, we considered of that, but decided that his opinion was no better than that of any other man. So the clerks got the total control. Well, that's kind of an impractical way to have things work. Not the business with the clerk, but Henry and I have worked out a sort of a power sharing thing in which I get to look at drafts of the warrant right along with the selectman. And I make suggestions. He doesn't have to take them, but I make suggestions as we go along. So there aren't any surprises in it for me. He checks with me about, am I available, and also the content of the warrant. They don't give up a shred of power. They can still put it together the way they see best. But there are no surprises for me when I get there, and I work on a no surprises basis with Henry once we're there, as far as what motions are going to be found to be okay. And oftentimes I'll look at something that they come up with and say, why are you writing it this way? And always, this is what we want to do. And I said, well, it won't work that way, but if you wrote this, it would work. Yeah. And in that sense, I think our meetings go relatively smoothly because we spend fairly little time bickering over is that or is that not a motion which fits within that article. Those arguments are behind us by the time the meeting starts.
But you do a good studying of the warrant before you.
Oh my, yes. Oh my, I get a lot of, and I tend to, or I try to go to meetings when these things are being discussed at the planning board or whatever. Now here's a case where the TV is a big advantage because to the extent the meetings are televised, I can watch them and I either tape them at home and watch them later or go.
Yeah.
But
I don't think that's the same, though. I don't think a planning board hearing is affected by television one way or another. If planning board hearings usually are about an issue that people feel about, and those who feel about it are going to be there.
They're going to be there, and they're not going to wait until it comes up. No. So no, I don't see a problem with doing things in real time there. It's the town meeting. Having them in real time, I think, is an issue, but we dealt with that already.
Now, just going back to the manager again, right now, Henry is really an arm of the selectmen, is he not?
Absolutely, sure.
Is a manager any different? Does a manager, just by definition, have a stronger role?
The role of the coordinator or the manager is whatever it's defined as being, and now that it's in place and the definition has changed, the name has changed, and the definition of the powers of the office have changed. That defines what our manager can do and what the manager can't do. I will say that in the prior situation, and I think Henry would be the first to admit this or say this, that he was doing a good deal more than the letter of the law, but but not over the heads of the selectmen, with their full support.
Yeah.
So he was acting in many ways as a manager.
Yeah.
But technically, the manager is whatever the charter in this case says he is, or she is.
Now, at the town meeting, you have the selectmen to your right.
To my right.
You have the police and safety and public works in front of you. You have the planning board to your left, and then the finance committee far off to the left. Is that purposeful?
I prefer to think of it from the viewer's point of view. I think the finance committee is on the far right.
Yeah, that's right. But is there any reason for that? I've always wondered. They always seem to fall into the same seats, and
That's right. And there was an attempt some years ago to put them together, and I was quite firm that I wanted the finance committee to have its own place. They are an independent group.
Right.
Their job is nothing more and nothing less than offering to the town meeting goer an opinion on each and every article, and that's the extent of it. Yeah. They can't hold other positions in town. They can't be town employees. So I very much value and treasure even the independence of the finance committee. That's why I appoint them and not somebody else. On the other hand, the table on the other side, so the viewers left looking at it from the audience, is selectman, town manager, and town council. And they head up the executive branch, and that's where a lot of the, all of the warrant and many of the articles in it originate there. Typically, a school committee and schools are in the audience on the right-hand side. Planning board sits in the front, but they're all close by.
Good. When the planning board holds a hearing, and they come to a conclusion about a parcel of land or a development or whatever the hearing's about, you then ask at town meeting when the article comes up, did they hold a hearing?
Did they hold a hearing? Yeah.
Now that at that particular point just becomes advisory, doesn't it? I mean, the town can either accept that suggestion of that hearing or not. Right.
Yeah, and the zoning bylaw is, or the zoning general laws, I believe, are Chapter 40A, if I'm not mistaken. And there's quite a bit in there, and the reason we go through that little ritual is that the hearing has to be held, and the townsfolk have to be advised when it was held and what the vote was and what the outcome was. So we always try to remember on a zoning bylaw to get that in early. And they then give their opinion on it. But really, zoning bylaws are created by the town meeting. And they can advise yes, no, or maybe, but it's the function of the town meeting to actually do that. And we're not bound to follow their recommendation.
Is this the best form of government for us now?
We are on the cusp, I think. I certainly am hearing a good deal about representative town meeting, and I think we could handle it either way. The time when I would say it's time to decide that it's time to start moving toward representative town meeting, in my view, is when two-room meetings become the norm. And I thought we were there in 2005 when just passing the school budget required 2 nights and 2 rooms and a huge to-do. I thought, my goodness, if we can't settle the school budget without having a gymnasium full and an auditorium full, maybe it's time. Since then, we haven't had such a meeting. And you can deal with that occasionally. It's what you have to do. You cannot hold a town meeting at which registered voters who want to attend are being excluded.
Right.
There is a state law which says if the moderator is advised that there's people in the hall outside who can't get in, it's incumbent on me to stop the meeting, huddle with the selectmen, and then it becomes the selectmen's chore within 7 days to find a time and a place where they can all fit in. Now that usually takes the form of saying, all right, we're going to have to take half an hour off and open the gymnasium. But you must, under this form of government, let everybody in. And since we have 12,000 voters, I've often thought, and some communities have had to do this, football field and hope it's sunny, is what you have to do on some of these huge issues. That is clearly getting impractical when you have to go to such extremes as that.
Yep.
Foxborough, for instance, when the Patriots went to the new stadium, there was a bunch of things they had to do that took town meeting decisions. Well, everyone wanted to go to that one. They were renting tents and chairs, and it was a huge thing. And getting a pretty far distance from standing under the spreading chestnut tree on the on the village green, you can do it, but you really should consider representative town meeting when that gets to be the norm.
So it's volume that would dictate the
in
change.
in my humble estimation. Now it's an interesting thing to me that the people I will call the regulars, the ones who are always there, are the strongest in favor of open town meeting. They really want that. And yet, when there is a high interest issue and people who normally don't come flooding in, they're the ones who are the most concerned. Well, I say, go to representative town meeting and be able to exclude them. If we had representative town meeting, only the people who were the regulars, the elected reps, would go, and the rest could come and watch, but they wouldn't because they couldn't vote. And who would the reps be if we had representative? They'd be the same people. They'd be you and Vince Borkowski and all the other people who always come to these meetings. You would take out papers and you would get the 12 signatures or 15 or whatever. It's not 50. It's usually quite a limited number. Yeah. And you'd be there. So it wouldn't really change the regular, normal town meeting. What it would change would be when a hot school issue came up, it would still be the same regular people. Yeah. It's also interesting, when the shoe was on the other foot, when I talk to people who come in just for those, I've often been roundly criticized after the meeting by folks like that who say, this is ludicrous, this is ridiculous. 1,000 people waving little slips of paper. Good heavens. Why don't you have representative town meeting and then I'd be represented? Yeah, and you'd also be excluded. That's right. So that's right. It's an interesting paradox.
Yeah. Do you think a town meeting is intimidating for the new participant? I mean, there's some people who just don't feel comfortable standing up in that kind of environment and expressing an opinion.
Yes. I know that's true.
Do you have any feeling about how that could be remediated a little bit?
Well, the way I try to is to every year before the annual town meeting, I run what I call a town meeting workshop. Right. I shouldn't say I, because Nancy Andriga takes an equal part in it, the town clerk. But the two of us get the library meeting room. This year it'll be the Wednesday before the annual town meeting. It's often the Thursday, but this year it's the Wednesday before. And there's no television there. It's just people who want to come and find out about it. And we usually get a crowd which varies from 6 to 16. It's not a large group, so it's not intimidating in and of itself. And that's a chance for someone to come in and ask all the questions they were afraid to ask, and hear how it works and get some background. And after that, the only way for the newcomer is just to come and watch. Yep. And you don't have to hold a major speech your first night out. Typically, first speeches come when experience is mounted up a little bit, and at the same time, interest in a particular issue has reached the point where someone says, I don't care, I'm going to put my hand up. Got to do that. Right.
The emotion runs high enough, yeah.
And I know, well, one of the letters in the exchange of letters that you referred to back in the fall in the Westboro News, a person felt intimidated, and if that's going on certainly to the extent I'm aware of it, I would step on it, but I cannot hear or see all that's going on toward the back of the room. But to the extent there's whispering or catcalls or remarks being made, that is grossly out of order.
That's right.
Grossly out of order. And any form of interrupting, heckling, that sort of stuff is just not in the spirit of town meeting.
That's right. I agree. I agree completely. That's the most discouraging part that I find. The applause or the booing or the hissing or whatever.
Work hard to step on those overt demonstrations just because, okay, I shouldn't say that. Once we voted on an issue, I know people put a lot into these things. I know that there's a lot of emotion, and they want to, they're relieved that it failed or that it passed, depending.
Do you think it would be, excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Okay.
Do you think it would be overworking the tellers if they were also responsible for identifying people in their section that wanted to speak and they caught your attention? You know, I see a lot of people kind of do this, and you're looking around intently to see if you can find somebody. You'll often say, just stand up if you want to say something, but I just wonder whether the tellers who are empowered to do the counting, you've already anointed them, whether if they could be helpful to you to identify there's a person over here, Joe. Or
sometimes they do, and it can be helpful because you know, I'll hear this rustling and I'll look, and so help me, even with the new lights and so forth that you guys have
finally got that fixed.
Got them fixed there. It can be hard to see a hand versus, you know, a background of other hands or something like that. Now, Dennis O'Neill, there never was any problem. Dennis would stand up there waving his report like a metronome. It was amusing. And standing is great if people will stand. In fact, there are some town meetings where in order to be recognized at all, you must stand. And you can have 6, 8, 10, 12 people standing at the same time. Maybe that's what we should.
Yeah, I've been to meetings in Maine. That's the standard.
Well, what do you think? How did it work? I mean, is this something we should? I hate to have people standing forever while long speeches are held.
Well, I almost feel it works better because once they stood up, they can begin to gain their poise. They're not called on immediately, but they're standing there ready to be called on.
Yes.
And some of that adrenaline, I think, helps them. I don't know. I may be all crazy about this, but my experience is that some people who would not normally just raise a hand and then suddenly stand up, if they stand up before, will feel more comfortable in talking because they've been standing. I may be way off the wall on that, but
I'll give it some thought for the next meeting.
That's been my experience. So right now we're at a point where town meeting is, in your mind, the best for Westboro.
Yeah.
Representative only when we get to numbers that are so cumbersome that we can't handle them
in a single room.
In single rooms.
I think if I can make eye contact with the others, if I can see them and hear them firsthand, it's still town meeting. Somehow, when you get to a second room, I know they've done wonders with the closed circuit TV, and I do have a rule that everybody has to be able to see whatever's on the screen. Yeah, right. So technically, yes, you're hearing and seeing everything that, no matter where you sit. But I liken it to the difference between a face-to-face meeting and a conference call.
Right.
They're not the same.
That's right.
You can do conference calls, telephone conference calls, I mean, and if all the parties know one another, you can get some business done. But it is different. That's right. And to me, if it gets to be more than an occasional two-room meeting, that's when we should start to think about it seriously.
Yeah. Would you spend just a moment helping people understand the school budget, what we can do with it, what we can't do with it? It comes up at town meeting. My understanding is the population can't do anything to decrease the spending authorized by the...
Oh, it can.
It can?
Well, why don't we do a little history?
Yeah, do that.
Back before 1980, before Prop 2.5 passed, the town meeting had nothing to say about the school budget. The school committee set the budget and threw it over the transom, so to speak, and that was what it was. Part of Prop 2.5, which, as you know, has been this arrangement whereby the levy can only increase by a certain amount each year, so a control on property taxes. Thrown into that was the ability of a town meeting to affect the bottom line of the school budget. We cannot go in and say, well, we think you ought to put in more for football and less for physics.
Yeah. Okay.
it's the bottom line only. And I'm not talking about Assabet. Assabet's a separate
Right.
budget for itself. I'm talking about local schools. I have had motions to reduce. I have had motions to increase from the budget that was recommended by the Finance Committee. And we could do that. But that's really all. As to what the school committee does with it, I mean, you could say, I think the school budget should be increased by X millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars so that we can do something or other. That's advice. It would not bind them. If the town voted to increase the school budget by $500,000 in order to, I won't give a crazy example, but specify that the school committee could take the money, say thank you very much, and spend it exactly as it saw fit. Now, that'd be a brave school committee that would do that,
Yeah.
but still.
I guess I was under the impression that we just couldn't reduce the budget of a
We can. I would entertain a motion to reduce. Now, if you carry that too far, we'd be in danger of losing accreditation. If the school committee had so little, let's take a bizarre, stupid example and say cut it in half.
Yeah.
Okay, I want my taxes to decrease, so I'm going to cut the school budget in half. Someone's going to call me tonight about this, but we could do it. But the school committee would be hard-pressed to run a school system that would pass state accreditation. And my understanding is what happens in that case, if the town doesn't remedy the issue, the state steps in, takes over the school system, and puts things right. So it can't go on without limit. But
Yeah, I'm certainly not agitating for it. I
no.
was under the impression that reducing it couldn't be done. That was a sacrosanct situation. It was just in place. That was it.
Oh.
Okay, that's
no,
interesting.
it can go up or down. And as I say, I've entertained motions to do either one.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, in recent history, the school committee and the finance committee have come in together, unified behind one budget. It's not always so.
All right.
And I can't give you the year, but there certainly was a year when the school committee went for a higher number than the finance committee. And someone, quote, for balance, threw in another number that was an equal amount below. Well, in our method of voting, we start with the highest number first and move through. And as soon as one gets a majority, then the voting's over. So we never got to that reduction motion, but it certainly could have been passed.
Well, you've been very thorough, John. I appreciate you doing it. One question I had, just to kind of close off with, for this little program that you run for new voters in the library, do you get enough cooperation from the television channel to help you advertise that? You want to make spots about that? Just to reach out now?
I should have mentioned this before. It's the Newcomers Club which does the arrangements. They hire the hall or get the hall and bring some refreshments, and they also do the publicity. And as I say, there's also a little spot on it on the website. But mostly I rely on the Newcomers Club, and I believe it's been on the cable TV as well. But that's certainly
Just the frequency of the announcement, then, I guess, is what I'd be interested in, so that more and more people see it. And
right. That's the best I can do.
Good,
Plus,
right.
plus the idea of just come, watch things for a while. You don't have to speak. A person who simply comes, listens, and votes intelligently does a marvelous thing for the town.
Yeah.
You do not have to be up there holding forth.
Yeah.
So just coming and listening and voting is what a lot of people do, and it's a great help.
Well, I think we deserve to pat ourselves on the back a little bit, and I think we've maintained a pretty healthy town, being run pretty efficiently.
Yeah.
Haven't had to override yet, and let's
Right.
knock on wood about that. But
Yeah. Well,
that's a good indication, it seems to me, of good management.
I think the town is well run, and that's one of the reasons I suspect that there aren't a lot of struggles, or at least there haven't been recently, between Finance Committee and the schools and the rest of the government, because it's pretty well run as it is, and they're not often out there saying absolutely no and not. the differences are relatively small and they get worked out on the way to town meeting.
Right. Anything else that you'd like to add? Anything I have forgotten to ask you?
Well, I must say, looking over this town report from the year before we came to town, I was amazed at the amount of change. I think of myself still, in New England parlance, I'm a newcomer, right?
We're from away, Joe.
I'm from away still, and always will be. But we had a speedway, a racetrack.
Right.
Anybody who wonders why the plaza out there is called Speedway Plaza, it was a speedway.
Darn right it was.
On Friday nights, you knew when 11 o'clock had come because that's when they stopped and the
noise stopped.
And the noise stopped.
Right.
We had an airport not far from the same place.
Two.
Well, we had a
strip across the road there.
Oh, okay. But the trees were smaller then, and we could look out of our west window, and you could see planes landing on what would become the AstraZeneca property. And there was an airport commission that was looking for years looking for a place for the new airport in town. Imagine that.
Yeah.
I was amazed to read in here that there were over 500 head of cattle in the town when we moved to the town, and 10 or more working dairy farms, 90 horses and ponies.
Do you remember Jack talking about that Westboro was the prime supplier for Boston with milk?
Milk, yeah, exactly. And a lot of that was just changing when we came to town.
Yeah.
I said I came to town in '73. I get a kick out of the fact that in the 40s and 50s, I drove through Westboro because I was a little shaver at that time, but my family used to exchange Thanksgiving visits with a family in Grafton. One year it would be in Grafton, the next year it would be in Wenham, and back and forth that way. And I can recall clearly, this would be late 40s, 50, 52, 53. We'd drive along Route 9, and Dad knew to turn at the Red Barn, which was morphed into tomfooleries and the Naked Fish, and it's now the Chateau. But we would make that sharp right turn at the Red Barn, and I'd get a kick of thinking, I drove over East Main when the post office was the Bramleys, right? No Hastings, no Fallon. All pretty much, no Willows.
Right.
All pretty much rural residential.
Yeah.
When we moved to town in '73, the property where the Willows is, I don't know the name, but there was a barn on the property still.
With big willows trees around it.
Yeah. So town's changed a lot just in my lifetime.
Yes, it
tremendous
has.
amount.
Yeah. Well, it's as Jack and Shirley said in our first session, it's changed a lot, but it's still a great town.
Yes.
It really is a good town. Great town to raise kids in, and
Yes.
we've been very happy here.
We too, and hope to stay as long as we possibly can.
Well, Joe, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you taking the time to come in and talk.
I've enjoyed it, and obviously anybody who has a problem with things I've said about town meeting, or a question about town meeting, or just wants to talk about it, that's my favorite topic.
Good.
So
Great.
I'm in the phone book, and they should just call.
Super. Thank you.
Good. You're welcome.